Hey, everybody. Welcome to Daniel Davis Deep Dive, live from Washington, D.C. But we have a really special show for you today. It's a little bit different than some of our others. We have a live shot out in the hinterland, actually near San Antonio, Texas. We have Scott Horton on location. I'm going to give you the exact, your formal introduction here in just a second. But Scott, what are you doing out in San Antonio today?
Well, me and my friends drove down from Austin to check out the solar eclipse. It was the Ring of Fire eclipse. It's not quite all the way over yet. You can just see a little bit of the sun. It's still blocked out. And we got it to where, because the moon is a little bit further away and so smaller, so it's the Ring of Fire. We can still see the sun all the way around. It's beautiful.
Wow, that's awesome.
So
I wish I was out there with you.
everybody check your, I think the Washington Post or any good paper will have a map of the path of the eclipse through the United States today. It's heading north from here. So people,
so there's still time to get out.
Look it up. That's right. Exactly. It's really great to see.
Awesome. Well, we're great to see you too, Scott. I'm really glad to have you here. I've been looking forward to this. Just for those who don't know, Scott Horton is the director of the Libertarian Institute, as you see emblazoned on your shirt right there. That's good. He's also host of the Scott Horton podcast and is a prolific author of many books, to include his most recent, which is Enough Already: Time to End the War on Terrorism. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Danny. And I'm so glad that you have this great show now. I've been watching it. It's wonderful. And of course, you know that I hold you in the highest esteem as a great American hero, especially for your truth telling about the failed Afghan surge in 2012, for which you risked everything, but also all the great truth telling and writing and everything that you've done since that time. So I'm very happy to be here with you, sir.
Well, I appreciate it, but we're going to focus on you today, and from my perspective, and if any in our audience are not as familiar with you as I am, Scott's actually a hero to me too, because he didn't serve in the military, but he is serving this country, and I think in potentially some ways more important than just taking up arms, because he is a great warrior for peace and an advocate for the end of dumb wars that are definitely not necessary, which is nearly all of them that we've been involved with for a long time. And so I'm really excited to have Scott on today. And, first of all, before we get into the current events with the Israeli-Hamas war, tell us a little bit about this book and what was behind it, why you wrote it, and what has been the reaction to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've really been like this the whole terror war long. I'm not bragging, but I just knew better in the first place. I was inoculated against the coming war on terrorism during the Clinton years. And so when it broke out, I already knew better. When everyone else was just angry and reacting, I understood that it was a trap. And I give credit to the great William Norman Grigg. He said, the action is in the reaction. That's what the communists say. They're trying to get us to do the wrong thing. So I've been, basically, again, not boasting or whatever, but just on the right side of this issue and understanding about the dynamics of the terror war the whole time through. So then the question always kind of was, and people were always telling me to write a book, and I was having a hard time kind of narrowing it down or figuring out how I wanted to focus it. And what happened was the great Tom Woods asked me, hey, what if we do like a war on terrorism for dummies, and we just give them a brief take on each of the wars? And so I said, oh, there you go. So I outlined it, and then I just went from there. And in fact, the outline is funny. The outline ended up becoming a PowerPoint presentation that took 5.5 hours to give. And then my good friend Joanne from Australia transcribed the whole thing, and that became the actual basis of the book. And then from there, it was just adding on and editing, of course. But
so that was 2021, if I'm not mistaken, when that was published. So did we have enough already? Is the war on terror over? I mean, how do you view it?
Well, I wish it was. I mean, we still have forces deployed in Iraq, although I'm not sure that they've been going out on missions against ISIS in the last couple of years, but we still have guys in Syria who are, embedded with the Kurds and still at risk of getting between them and our other allies, the Turks, who back al-Qaeda in the Idlib province still. And quite frankly, Idlib province is a little Islamic caliphate itself right now under Turkish and American protection ever since the end of the dirty war in Syria back in 2017. And we have now al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, who are deadly, dangerous, real Al-Qaeda terrorists, not just Al-Qaeda linked. And these guys have attacked the United States repeatedly, slaughtered our friends in Europe as well. And Barack Obama, who had started out with a drone war against them in 2009, ended up switching sides and taking Al-Qaeda's side against their enemies, the Shiite Houthis, in 2015. And that's where that Donald Trump continued all the way through his presidency and is only sort of at a ceasefire now, no thanks to Joe Biden, whose government, in fact, is trying to sabotage peace talks there to keep the war going. But anyway, for our purposes, for your question here, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has got to be 1,000 times more dangerous than they ever were before, because they've been, when Obama's bombing them, they just grow and grow and grow. When he takes their side, they grow by exponential proportions. And at one point, Danny, I believe in 2017 during Trump, there was some bad public relations about how Al-Qaeda had taken over approximately 7 towns on the Yemen coast. And so the Qataris were told, hey, this is getting embarrassing. We need you guys to, pardon me, I didn't mean to say Qataris. I meant to say the UAE, sir. They were the allies of Saudi in this war and America in this war. And so America said to UAE, listen, we need you to do something about Al-Qaeda taking over all these towns on Yemen's coast. So the UAE, Danny, they went in there and killed them all. No, I'm just kidding. They went in there and hired them all and named them the Giants Brigade. And they're now the main armed mercenary force of the United Arab Emirates on the ground in Yemen for years now. And so I believe, I don't know what threat they really pose to the United States of America now. Maybe we'll just send them off to fight the Russians in Chechnya again or something. But I think it's almost certain that our government will, ultimately switch sides in Yemen back again. And we have, unless something major changes, if we're just on autopilot here,
Well,
we're going to
yeah,
have drone
and
wars and special ops
unfortunately,
wars for years.
we do seem to be on autopilot in one regard, where we'll shift sides left and right, whatever we need to do, because there's too many people in our country that are, we call them hawks. That's almost too nice of a term, because they seem to desire for war to go on. And this is a topic you and I've talked about many times before. And I want to look at it particularly in terms of this Israel-Hamas war. Now, we'll talk some of the specifics of the conflict here in a moment, but
Sure.
I want to start off with kind of the almost the audience looking above it from the United States perspective, and how two particular people in the U.S. Are suggesting that the United States view this in terms of doing stuff that would draw us into the fight. Not that we would get sucked into it, but that we would insert ourselves into it. First, I want to see on Hannity last night, you had Vice President Pence, who of course is running for president, and he wants to look tough. So here's what he said.
I'm very heartened to hear some of your guests say that Israel is today focused on hostage rescue. I'd hoped that President Biden would direct Joint Special Operations Command, our Delta Force, our Navy SEALs to work in close proximity with Israeli Defense Forces, because we've got Americans that are held hostage. And I respect at least the reporting that just happened on your broadcast, that there's a focus on getting our hostages home. But I think we ought to be making it clear that with Americans in harm's way, with our cherished ally Israel suffering this brutal assault and now hostages being held, that we ought to make it clear to Hamas that they either turn them over or we're coming in, and we're coming in hard.
Okay, if we provide Israel with $3.8 billion a year. We have helped for many, many years. We've given them billions and billions of dollars for this very purpose, so that they could have a world-class military that can handle their own national security, and they have one. They were caught off guard. They were caught surprised. They were embarrassed initially, but they have a world-class, certainly within that region, the best overall military. They don't need America to come in, and to come in hard. Just because there were some Americans that happened to be on the ground when this happened doesn't mean the U.S. should come in, but this is what Pence actually seems to want to do. Now, I wonder if you think, is he just saying this because he's a politician running for office, or do you think he actually means that, yeah, we should go in there?
Well, he very well might mean it. I presume his honesty in his statement, the way he said it. The reality is, and look, I think he's probably speaking for some major proportion of the American foreign policy establishment and maybe even the American people. Something bad happened, you send the army there to go and explode things until everything is fine again. That's what everybody thinks. And, I remember when I was 15 years old, it was when I was a freshman in high school, was when they launched Iraq War One. And everyone, which I know you served in, Danny, but everyone was just essentially indulging their bloodlust, right? God says you're not allowed to kill people. But if President Bush says you can kill people, and you're putting on olive green, like when John Wayne went and took on Hitler in all the movies and all that, well, obviously God would let you go fight Hitler. So that's the exception to the you're not allowed to kill people or else you'll go to hell forever rule, as long as you're fighting for your country. And so it didn't matter that Iraq was some pathetic third world state. That was no threat to Saudi Arabia, much less the United States of America. What mattered was this is a time that we can all indulge in the fun of sin, and yet somehow it's okay because we get to wrap it up in red, white, and blue as we're invading these people's country and killing them by the tens of thousands. And I remember thinking that it was fun, that it was great. My friend had a shirt that said "Nuke Iraq." And I said, yeah, cool shirt, because I wanted to see some explosions and I wanted to see some blood. And I didn't give a damn about the Kuwaitis, and I didn't give a damn about the people of Iraq either. I wanted to see heavy equipment doing cool heavy equipment stuff because I like fighter bombers, because I was raised on G.I. Joe and I'm a heterosexual American male. And it's fun. It's fun. Except that I was a 15-year-old little psychopath. We're supposed to be grown men here. We're supposed to be better than this. We're supposed to not be upset, but we're supposed to be thinking as though we're all writing in the journals of the pages of the War College. What do wise men do in a situation like this? Not what do a bunch of emotional little children having a nervous breakdown do when they're upset. And look what happened, Danny. Because of the consequences of Iraq War One, when everyone engaged their bloodlust 30 years ago in that absolutely unnecessary war. Because of that, we stayed in Saudi Arabia. Why? Because Israel said, now that you weakened Iraq so much, they can't balance Iran. So now we need you to stay in Saudi Arabia for the dual containment policy to contain Iraq and Iran. And that means bombing Iraq every other day for 8 years. And that was the cause of September 11th. That was the reason that Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan and George Bush and Bill Clinton's Al-Qaeda mercenary terrorists, who after all had fought for Bill Clinton in Bosnia, in Kosovo, and in Chechnya, right up until the time of September 11th. That was the reason they attacked the United States of America, because America was over there, because America was on a mission that 15-year-old Scott Horton thought was a great idea, to go and have some fun at the expense of the people of Iraq. And we've been bombing Iraq for 30 years ever since then.
Right. And now then, to your point about, what wise men at the War College should do, unfortunately, somebody who's like one of the people who ought to be the instructor there is actually adding some fuel to the fire, because retired 4-star General Jack Keane, whom I know you hold in the highest of warmth and affection, also said this on the same day earlier on Fox.
Their number one proxy in the world is Hezbollah. If they get into the fight, I hope we've already told the Iranians that we will respond in kind to you if your number one proxy joins this fight. I would have liked the declaration to be made public, but I can understand there's value also in doing it privately, so somebody doesn't have to call a public statement like that, a public declaration. But I've got concerns, Brian, whether the administration is doing that at all.
Okay, so first you have Vice President Pence saying, yeah, we should go after Hamas because we're big and tough and they killed some Americans, and we don't want to worry about letting Israel handle their own affairs. Now then you have Jack Keane saying, oh, and by the way, especially if Hamas, Hezbollah gets involved from Lebanon, we should hit them too. And we should go after Iran and make sure that they're aware that this is something that they can't do because we'll shoot them too. And there's been some others. I just wanted to keep it at these two, but there's a number of people who are basically saying we should go after Iran too. Scott, you said at the outset of this broadcast that you had seen earlier on with the war on terror how this was not going to win. Now, tell us what you think would happen if we actually did get involved with either Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran. What is that going to do? Is that going to make us safer?
No, absolutely not. And first of all, look, you have to take into account who's speaking there. General Jack Keane was one of the worst warmongers cheerleading for getting us into Iraq War II. And worse than that, the great champion of the surge of 2007. Well, what did that do? That solidified the gains of the Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution in Iraq. In other words, the Ayatollah Khamenei's men. So Jack Keane, not literally, only through his abject stupidity and incompetence and negligence, is an Iranian agent. He helped turn Iraq over to Iran because he's pathetic and stupid. So no one should listen to him at all. What does he know? If we do what he wants, we'd probably have the Ayatollah ruling in Tel Aviv. So instead of listening to the guy who got us into this mess, who also championed the great failed surge of Afghanistan at the cost of hundreds of thousands of innocent lives as well, just look at what Hamas was trying to do here. You know, these people got no imagination. They got all bloodlust, but no intelligence. Why would Hamas get out of their, make their jailbreak, Danny, and instead of going after IDF bases only, which they did, but why would they go after civilians on their kibbutzes and slaughter men, women, and children by the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds? It's not because they're devils. It's not because Mohammed made them do it. It's not because they're just angry. It's a strategy, right? It's war. And what they're trying to do was provoke a reaction. They're trying to get us, and obviously our allies, Israel, and even including us, to do something crazy and stupid, because with the reaction comes the counter reaction.
But
sure.
Hold on just a second. So now, is this just a Hamas deal? I mean, they're the ones that are paying for this up front because it's coming in on them now, and their Palestinian people are paying a massive price because of what they initiated here. Mm-hmm. But are you suggesting this is what Hamas is trying to do to suck us all in there? Or is this maybe a regional thing where that's what they want to do? Maybe the Iranians and Hezbollah and all them want a war and they want to draw us in. I mean, who do you think is behind that?
Well, I think Hamas is trying to draw in anyone who's a potential ally of theirs in the region. I don't think they're necessarily trying to draw in the United States, although that's obviously a potential result of this. But if you look at just on the very basic level, and people always use these cliches about, fourth dimensional chess, which it's, in other words, it's stupid. It's when somebody is doing something wrong and someone else is trying to excuse it, or it just sounds impossible. What fourth dimension? That's not what I'm talking about here. This is just plain old chess, okay? Two-dimensional politics, okay? And what it is this is from Saul Alinsky, the left-wing radical, in his book, Rules for Radicals, page 75. He says, in all asymmetric political action, the action is in the reaction of the opposition, right? So Hamas has zero power compared to Israel. They got AK-47s and shoes, right? So what they do is they slaughter innocent men, women, and children, forcing the Israelis to launch a massive counter assault against the Gaza Strip, which of course kills thousands of innocent people. We're already at more than 1,000 innocent dead Palestinians as a result, which is so far. Which Hamas did on purpose. That is what Hamas did, was deliberately cause Israel to attack the Gaza Strip and kill those people, because then comes the counter reaction. Now, Nasrallah leading Hezbollah in Lebanon, he has to take a stand and he has to decide how far he's going to go. Same for Assad in Damascus. Same for the very pro-Hezbollah, very pro-Iran government that George W. Bush and General Jack Keane and his understudy Petraeus installed in power in Iraq. And now look at what happened to Crown Prince Bonesaw, who's supposed to be our loyal little sock puppet in Saudi Arabia. The first thing he did was get on the phone to the Ayatollah in Iran. And he probably doesn't mean it, but he feels that pressure, right? So in other words, what's happened is by slaughtering these innocent people, and Danny, I'll tell you the truth, an extended family member of mine was abducted and murdered by Hamas in this thing.
My God, I'm so sorry.
It's not someone that I had known personally, but it's an extended family member of mine. It's very real, okay? So they murdered these people to get Israel to react, to get everybody else to have to also react to Israel's reaction. And that includes in the West too, where you see people, protesting in the street.
Hang on, before you get off that topic there. This is obviously a very different situation. Most in the West so far are actually not even paying attention, not even thinking about why Hamas did this and what their objectives are. They just see a what's the word I hear? Unprovoked and a mindless act of terror and
Of
evil.
course.
So they just wanted to kill. No thought about the results. But
in other words, they don't know anything about it, and they're not willing to learn.
What Hamas is doing, though, they are taking a huge risk, because if they don't get the reaction they're looking for, they're all going to get wiped out and they might cease to exist. But tell me, why do you think that they're willing to take such a massive risk that they know is going to get many of them killed, many of their their own people in Palestine killed, but to try to draw this in to get? Why would they take such a desperate action, do you think?
Right. Okay. On your first point, I think that's worth addressing. Terrorism is usually as stupid as it is cruel and sinful and horrible and wrong, because it usually doesn't work. It usually provokes the kind of reaction that ends up eliminating the terrorist group or eliminating their local support and this kind of thing. It can be effective in some circumstances. I think Max Abrams, the professor from Northeastern University, has said that almost always terrorist groups end up sabotaging themselves by trying stuff like this. Okay, that doesn't mean there's not a strategic logic behind it, but it just means it isn't necessarily wise for them to do, even from their own perspective. As you just said, they're taking an awful risk by doing this. They're not just getting thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians killed, they're getting themselves killed too. And maybe it's quite possible that the fight would go on so long and so severely that their organization actually truly is destroyed, which is clearly within the realm of possibility. But yes, that's a risk. And yes, they know that. And so then the second part of your question, why would they do that? Yeah. And the truthful answer here, Danny, and I know that people who lean right, they just don't want to hear this. They don't want to understand this fact. Okay. But the truth is, it's because the people of the Gaza Strip, and for that matter, the people of the West Bank too, but especially in Gaza, these are among the most oppressed people on the face of the earth. See, they always talk about Israel, Palestine, the Israelis, the Palestinians. Well, it sounds like the Palestinians already have a country, because everybody has a country, right? Palestine. But they don't have a country, okay? When Israel was created, they made a secret deal with the king of Jordan that he would keep the West Bank so that the Palestinians could not have their state. Then, after the 67 war, when the Israelis seized the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, they started moving their settlers in and carving it up. They call the West Bank Judea and Samaria. And in violation of the Geneva Conventions and the UN Charter and every other thing in all the international law, they've been since 67 committing the war crime of moving their civilian population into territory conquered in war. Conquered from the Palestinians, who didn't start the 67 war. They were only innocents stuck in the middle. And so the people of Gaza in 2005, the Prime Minister Ariel Sharon ended the occupation there. And they pretended, Danny, that this was magnanimous. See, we're just being nice to the little people of Gaza. But that wasn't true, okay? What they did was they put the place under a total siege. And in fact, Ariel Sharon's aide, Dov Weissglass, it's D-O-V with no E, just D-O-V with no E, Weissglass. People can search this and look this up. He said, the reason we're pulling out of Gaza is to put the peace process in formaldehyde. It's to freeze the peace process, because as long as we have the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank separate from each other, then it makes it harder for them to have a unified position to negotiate. And I'll go one further real quick here, is they have said over and over again since 2000, and people can check my Twitter feed, Scott Horton Show. I have all my footnotes for you, and we're working on an article for this, about this. But there's so many sources about this, Danny, where Netanyahu himself, in his own words to his cabinet, as well as the highest level people in his government, they have said explicitly they prefer that Hamas control the Gaza Strip in order to prevent them from being pressured into negotiating with the Palestinian Authority and having a two-state solution of independence for the Palestinians. Netanyahu said, but we control the height of the flame. Yeah, but they don't. And the flame just jumped out of the frying pan and caught the whole damn kitchen on fire.
Right. So now then, here's where we are. All of that stuff you just mentioned there, especially from the Palestinian perspective, that is all true. And I wish more people in the West would be asking the question of why would the Hamas do this? Why would the Palestinian leadership take such an action that's, you know, so detrimental to their own cause and do this heinous thing? Why would they do that? Unfortunately, no one's asking that question. And so most in the West believe, well, this is just the bad guys, so we got to go in and kill them all. You heard those comments before, and many are making in the West. But if what you say is correct, and this was almost an act of, not almost, it was an act of desperation to try and do something to bring that flame out of the fire, which could consume the kitchen and you know, burn up the frying pan and everybody around it. Yep. Where do we go from here? Because so far, at least as of this broadcast, Israel has not launched its ground incursion. So Hezbollah has not launched an attack into Israel from the north, and Iran has not done anything on its end too. So at this moment, the flame is not out of control. But what's going to happen if it does? And actually a better question, what can happen right now? What can the U.S. do to prevent this from escalating further?
Oh my God, I got bad news for you. Joe Biden is the president of the United States of America right now. And he might as well be Benjamin Netanyahu's little brother. He's not going to do a thing right here. But if he was to do the right thing, what it would be to pull the e-brake as hard as he can, get on the phone with America's sock puppet dictator in Egypt, General Fattah al-Sisi, and get on the phone to Recep Erdogan in Turkey and have them intervene in peace talks, because both of those countries are extremely close to Israel, and both of those countries also are close, have some ties with, well, Turkey especially has ties with the Muslim Brotherhood, and Egypt still has, channels of communication with Hamas and are trusted by the Israelis. And so that's what we need. That's my first idea. Throw in Jordan if you want. We need Muslim countries, sovereign governments that get along with Israel to get in between them and Hamas and negotiate right now, prisoner swaps and the rest. And the problem is all the stakes, everybody raises the stakes so high. Everybody climbs up on the ladder so high that they feel like they can't climb down. But you see, then now we're talking public choice theory, right? Now we're not talking about what's good for Israel and Palestine. Now we're talking about, well, what's good for Netanyahu and what's good for Nasrallah and what's good for Joe Biden.
And unfortunately, because of the way that the Hamas did this by slaughtering so many just outright innocent civilians, that just ripped the public sentiment in Israel off the charts. And right. I can't see any possibility that the people themselves, even forget about Netanyahu, would be willing to negotiate any kind of a deal with Hamas. I mean, they all seem to want them dead and destroyed. I mean, do you see any way to square that part?
No, if it's going to happen, it's going to be because some Israeli generals insist, right? Or some professionals at Mossad, or some professionals in the highest ranking layers of the Israeli military say, no, this is wrong. We're not going that far. We're not doing this. We're not doing that. I mean, you just said, essentially it's taken as a given, basically, or it's an assumption, assumed extremely likely or probable by everyone, that when they do a full-scale ground incursion, that could light off everything in northern Israel with Hezbollah. And if they go to full-scale war with Hezbollah, then that could bleed immediately into Syria, Iraq, Iran, and the rest. We just can't afford that. It couldn't possibly be worth it to do that. And especially when, like, let's say you only even care about the Israelis here, where they're holding somewhere near 100 Israeli hostages, including a flag officer. I think a lieutenant general was taken. Okay. And again, my mother-in-law's cousin was abducted and then murdered, right? Not machine gun out in the thing. She was abducted and killed. Oh, God. So those hostages that are still alive are still alive. Are we prioritizing that? Is Israel prioritizing that? Or this is all about who gets to be King Kong and beat their chest and act like a tough guy?
Yeah.
It's look, And again, the reason I go back to September 11th is because we spent 20 years being stupid. We spent 20 years letting a bunch of liars and scum lie us into war after war after war after war. Where, look, as you know, Danny, in Libya, Syria, and in Yemen, we're fighting on the side of Al Qaeda, not against them, but it's all in the name of counterterrorism. And because what happened was all of the macho, tough guy, right-wing Republicans in America turned their brains off. And they turned into a bunch of screaming little college kids. When I'm upset, somebody go blow up something for me. And then when that didn't work, they said, use a bigger bomb. And when that didn't work, they said, use a bigger bomb. And now here it is. It's 22 years later. Everything goes crazy in Palestine. And they go, oh, I guess history began last Saturday morning when these barbarians attacked our friends for no reason at all. Well, wait a minute. I thought George W. Bush won the war on terrorism in 2006.
Right.
When he forced them to hold an election and elect Hamas in the
Right.
Gaza
Yeah, that
Strip.
didn't work out well. And then there were never
No.
any more elections after that. And, I'll tell you, Scott, the thing that just worries me so much as to where we're at right now is because of all the history that preceded October the 7th and all the opportunities for off-ramps that were never taken. And you just illuminated some of them. Because of the actions Hamas took against Israel, and now that Israel has already by just leveling entire quarters of Gaza Strip so far, and they haven't even gone in yet, it's just hard for me to imagine that anyone could think sanely now. And the consequences of more stupidity, as you call it here, could be catastrophic. So as bad as it's been so far, it's still containable. And I fear that I just don't know who's got the moral courage, if not even the wisdom, to be able to step in and do some of the things you suggest that has power. And so if it doesn't, if things are allowed to just carry their own emotional, I fear that we're going to be talking in a month from now about how do we contain this regional war. That's what I fear.
I agree with you. And quite frankly, I think the only one who has the courage, if you call it that, to fight about this and say the right thing would be Donald Trump. But he doesn't know the first thing about it, and he's on the wrong side completely. He is one of the worst presidents for Israel-Palestine issues, worse than W. Bush even, in what he did, recognizing Israel's absolute theft of the Golan Heights, moving the embassy to Jerusalem and the rest of that. And so he's the kind of guy who he doesn't give a dang. He'll tell you the truth, but he doesn't know it. And so
he'll tell you what he thinks for
that's
sure.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, listen, Scott, I really appreciate all these insights. I know I can see that this is a real emotional issue for more than just the obvious reasons. And we're really sorry for the loss of your family.
Thank you.
But I'm afraid that we'll probably be discussing this again later, whether on my show or your show, about what happens next. And God help us all if this goes in that bad direction. I pray that somehow wisdom will penetrate through. But thanks for coming on our show. Enjoy the rest of your time in San Antonio, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you so much, Danny.